All right.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Knowledge Commons, where we explore the digital realm of knowledge sharing across the world. And today we have a special guest, Saul Costa, and we're going to talk about a different aspect here. Not so much about institutional purveying of knowledge commons, but a different tech for good type perspective. So I'm going to hand it off to Jessica, and we're going to get going.
So my name is Jessica Talisman. I'm Andrew's co-host here, and we're so excited to have Saul. I will give full transparency, as I've worked with Saul in the past, and so I'm going to sit back on my heels a little bit so as not to introduce too much bias or give too many prompts to Andrew here. But I'm very excited to chat with Saul about some of the projects he's been doing. And it truly does align with the Knowledge Commons in that, it's about socializing and democratizing resources and technology. And essentially, that's what we're talking about from a broader scale. So I'll hand it back to you, Andrew, and we'll kick it off with Saul.
Okay. So I'm going to start off, Saul, with this topic of a viable solutions in the commons. And one of the things I think about is like, why do we have to bring up a viable solution in the commons? Because, the assumption here is that, the commons should have a closed loop, as any ecosystem would. And so what are your thoughts on that? Typically, we deal in a world where institutions are kind of like the substrate to most commons that we have in the digital realm, in terms of federal participation and state and local participation. And it's really a top-down approach, but I imagine you see it in a different light, and I'd like to kind of expand on that. So tell us what you think.
Yeah, for sure. I'll kind of just kick it off. Quick intro as well. So Saul Costa, I am based out of Vermont. Grew up here as a homeschooled Vermont farm boy, and then followed a passion for technology west to California. Spent 10 years there in tech, did a education technology startup, helped people get hands-on experience with different tech skills. Sold that in 2020, and then kind of spent a few years like figuring out myself a little bit, figuring out some of what's going on in the world, and then kind of relocated back to Vermont to start to kind of bring together some of the tech elements of the work that I've done, but then also kind of an understanding of the world and just how I want to be showing up in it. That's kind of what's led us to this point. So Andrew, so you're basically saying you are saying that why is it that we require these loops, right? Is that basically what you're asking? Like within this, like why do the loops have to be there?
Yeah, well, I'm even suggesting that, like, if you think about this as an ecosystem, and I think it is, in the current open data ecosystem, it's the institutions almost act as an invisible hand to help feed the ecosystem. And in their absence, there's a lot of questions around whether it would survive. So it's not really a bottom-up or approach to how it could be. So I'm curious, how could the populace as a whole, how could tech for good kind of supplant or be a kind of a counterpart to the institutional contributions here? Curious about what you think about that.
Totally, yeah, and maybe I'll just kind of frame like the technology space in general and like the tech for good industry, and by that I would mean like nonprofits in particular. And so I founded my first nonprofit 2 years ago, which is Shock, and since then, especially in Vermont, I've spent a lot of time speaking with nonprofit leaders, trying to understand where they are technologically speaking. And it's very unfortunate because the nonprofit space has been completely neglected by the technological revolution. Somebody yesterday proposed a listserv as like a critical piece of the infrastructure that they thought we should use to solve this huge problem for the state. And I'm just happy that they have email and spreadsheets, to be completely honest. And I'm amazed at how far they've gotten just using those. So within the the for good space, I think the tech element is now just really starting to emerge. And the reason that I think that has taken so long to see this kind of counterpart to the for-profit institutional tech world is that you can't make a lot of money doing tech for good. And in fact, in the beginning, you can barely make any money because you have, and you really can't stand up the organization either, because you have a cost of a technology company, which is very high, pay those programmers, and then you're going out and potentially securing some funding from grants and so forth, which are these tiny little bits and pieces coming in. So there's this massive, massive barrier that exists in the nonprofit space to actually utilizing the technology that the for-profit space has been doing now for decades. That said, one thing that we're seeing, and at Shock, we're really fortunate because we are able to use founder funds to kind of like really supercharge this and get us moving very, very quickly. And what we're starting to see, and this is a common theme that others have noticed in the nonprofit space as well, is that if you can get over that hurdle, then it really doesn't become necessarily a numbers game in so much as like building a narrative through storytelling and creating a movement that can then drive towards a larger fundraising system that can start to support the overall organization. And we haven't gotten necessarily to this point yet ourselves, but our theory is really that people like to see good happening in their communities, and they want to be able to show up for that, whether that's financially, showing up in person, but there aren't a lot of opportunities to get behind something that is like relevant within their community, directly within their community, but also has the momentum that is catchy, right? When you see a company rolling out new AI models every few months, it's like, yeah, this is the future, this is innovation. And with nonprofits, they're really struggling, fighting uphill to do things like that. But when you accomplish that, it's great because then you have those real world meaningful stories that you can take back to the communities and use that as your fundraising collateral, I guess you could say. So high barrier to entry to creating those, to integrating those tech systems within the for good world, but ultimately something that once those are surpassed can really build, I think, financial momentum that can help create those sustainable organizations that we need.
And to define the space, like when we say tech for good, what are the different types of tech for good avenues? Like I know that there's community tech and civic tech. What are your thoughts on that? What does the ecosystem look like, and where are the opportunities?
Yeah, I think if we want to really talk about tech for good, it's actually a very fundamental discussion, and it's not a we can get there from here type of a thing, honestly, in my opinion. I think a lot of the tech for good that we've seen is still applying a lot of principles from the for-profit space that are not considered good. Data privacy is one example right there that's across the board. And so there are these tools that are being produced, and the real world use of those tools is, intended to further a mission. A lot of those companies remain for profit for an understandable reason, right? Nonprofits can't raise massive funding rounds or equity funding rounds. But ultimately, I think if we're really going to say that something is tech for good, it requires us to actually rethink the relationships that we have with that technology and what we are willing to accept as the consumer of that technology. And so specifically, when we're going out and we're creating tech that we say is for good, it's a complete rethink of how that technology is going to show up, the data that it's going to be tracking, the intended purpose, right? Like tech for good is not tech that keeps you on your phone and tries to, it could be a valuable tool, but social media is not tech for good regardless of what the content is, because of the underlying patterns of usage. So I think for tech to truly be good, it can't just be the intended use of the technology. It actually really comes down to the implementation and the morals. And that's a shift that is more fundamental than I think might be immediately apparent. But what's also really cool is that we as a society right now are starting to wake up to the idea that tech is not good intrinsically, which I think we all thought for a little while that tech was going to democratize everything and we were going to have all these, wonderful ways of coming together and solve all these problems. And we have done a lot of that. But unfortunately, technology has mostly been used to make money, kill people, and suppress our freedoms. And that's unfortunate, but that's just one side of the coin, right? And so
Right.
now I think that we're starting to understand that this is a bifurcation of the way that we can approach technology. It's not a migration from where we are into the nonprofit space. This is really, we have to start from the beginning and start rethinking our engagements with technology fundamentally.
I have a follow-up question on that, because that's a really, really interesting perspective. Is in founding your organization in Shock, and even with your work with B, do you find that there's a network of like-mindedness, communities of tech folk or people that are like-minded, have similar practices? Like, is there a playbook for this? Are there people? Are there ways that, these different efforts communicate with one another?
Yeah.
How does that give way?
I think it's interesting. So I was at a summit yesterday called Reimagining Rural Capacity, and everyone in that room, 250 nonprofit leaders, were aligned on exactly what they needed. And all they're asking for is a portal where they can see the other nonprofits in the state. Like, that right there is 80% of the way for them. Vermont has the highest per capita rate of most things, but nonprofits is one of them. We have 4,000 nonprofits in a state of 700,000 people.
Wow.
And that is a result of a number of things, tribal culture being one of those, but ultimately, especially in the current funding environment, there's no way we can continue with that. We can't keep working in silos, which is what's happening. And so it's really cool, because when you bring those people together, they're all aware of the things that they collectively need and individually need to be able to succeed. The difficult component, I think, is the translation then into the technological realm. And as service providers showing up to support nonprofits, I think that's really the challenge, but also the opportunity, because there is like an education element, getting people comfortable with using technology in new ways. But at the same time, there's so much low-hanging fruit that can be so impactful within the for good, or the nonprofit space, that it's a wonderful place to make those types of investments. So I think the like-mindedness it's not to the tech level yet. I think there's a lot more conversations like this to be had about what tech for good actually means. But the use, the for good part of it, that exists. There's unity around that. There has been for a long time, and I think it's a great place to be investing and to be committing yourself to.
Yeah, I was curious. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I was curious about your previous comment on storytelling. How does storytelling get mind share in this community with a dearth of infrastructure, constraints monetarily to be able to publish that, not having a platform that these groups of organizations own? How do they get a voice out there with those?
Right now, they're not, and they're engaging with, though they are, but it's very hard, right? And it's harder than it should be. So a lot of the nonprofits are, at least, and I'll speak to what I see in Vermont, which is where I'm operating and what I know, but the nonprofits are very focused in on particular communities. And so within those spaces, they've been able, or like a particular narrow issue, and that's fine, because they have limited resources. That's smart to be able to succeed, but it does end up bringing people that they have direct interactions with into their network, as opposed to kind of a more broad strategy that could speak to people beyond just the people that they're engaging with. And I can say the tactic that we've taken at Shock, at least, has been to kind of be a little bit like a tech company. We have a social media team, we have a marketing team, and we're really we're showing up in a way that you wouldn't think we're a nonprofit. And I don't know how to run a nonprofit. I only know how to run tech startups, so that's probably a big piece of it. But you have to be able to leverage the platforms that do exist. I don't go on social media. I'm totally against social media fundamentally, but I do understand that it's a valuable communication channel and something that you can put positive content into, as well as the stuff that we see coming through right now. The problem is that most of these nonprofits, they're lucky if they've hired an intern. That is the support that they get. And so when we're thinking about how to show up in the nonprofit space and to support these organizations, there needs to be a services component to this as well, because the channels are there to be able to amplify the work that is being done, but there's a lack of resources, a lack of knowledge, both in terms of implementation and potential within the nonprofit space that really starts to constrain those channels.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Does this go beyond like a social media company for hire? Is it more than that, or how do you see it? Are the current social media platforms a stopgap measure in your mind? Do you see something more than that for this group?
For the Tech for Good community?
Yeah.
Yes. I think, well, number one, I think social media is primarily to blame for where we are today in multitude of levels. I think it's completely eroded our relationships with each other. It's eroded our relationships with the real world, which through that we've lost care about the environment that we live in and are dependent on because we're not interacting with it. And so I think that where would you approach this? It's definitely not a social network, right? Like it's not about bringing people together in the online space. And this is something with our technology that we're very, very deliberate about. Is when people ask us, what are you creating? We say, well, we build apps that help get people off their phone and back out into the real world. And they kind of look at you and they're like, wait, so you're like, but it's tech, but you don't want to use the tech. It's like, yeah, that's the use of tech here that can be valuable. And so I think in the ideal world, honestly, in my opinion, if this all plays out, we are spending way less time on the internet. We're doing wonderful things like this. We're doing research. We're not scrolling for 14 hours on my phone and just kind of lost in these realms. So it's like I think the thing that's exciting about tech, but also just good to know in advance, is that at a certain point, for it to be effective, it has to drop off and it has to transfer into that real world impact. We exist in a world of AI slop and fake ads, and reality is so difficult or maybe even impossible to discern from the online spaces that we're in right now. And I think that that's probably in many ways a factor of online communities that hit certain sizes. And I don't know if you can solve that by just changing the way that you're tracking people's data, but I think it's about determining what are those real world systems that we want to improve and the types of experiences we want to create with people together, and building towards systems that are going to support that.
I'm curious about the bringing people together in real life, reality tech. So you've kind of, think you coined that, the idea of reality tech, or the concept of it, in that it's meant to bring people together in real life and less dependent on your device or a device. Can you speak to reality tech a little bit, and we'll talk more about how you've applied it as well as a follow-up.
Yeah, totally. So reality tech is kind of the fundamental philosophy of the work that we're doing at Shock. And an element of it is getting people off their phones and back out into the real world, but that's almost more like implementation level. Reality tech fundamentally is about that reframing of relationships with technology. And a good reality tech does something that we really don't see right now, which is it makes the person feel more human than a consumed, monetized record inside of a database. And so it's kind of that fundamental element that I spoke to earlier of, hey, this isn't just about the package you're using or the privacy settings and for cookies on the website. This is a fundamental rethink of is technology working for us, or are we working for technology? And we all know which one we're in right now. But if we're pushing towards a world where we're deploying more reality tech, it's really about what are those real world problems that we can solve by helping reframe people's relationships with technology. Reality tech isn't about going out and selling the next data set. Reality tech companies aren't going and building rideshare companies and all of that, even though they take rides in the real world. Reality tech is about taking technology, applying it to real world problems by reframing people's relationships with the technology that we use every day.
I love that. And so like that, it's framing or using that as the framework or the frame for Shock's first big launch. Can you tell us about the B app?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So the B app is a currently Vermont-focused app that is effectively your community bulletin board, but in your pocket and on a map. And the map piece might sound very fundamental, right? And it is, but there's a problem in the current space of volunteerism and finding community events and so forth, which is you have to see the one coffee shop bulletin board. You have to be on the one newsletter from your town or from the nonprofit that you want to find out, want to stay up to date on. And yet at the same time, all of these other things are happening around you all the time. But even if you are aware of them, figuring out where they are, right? Like Vermont's not easy to drive around. You got to drive down a mountain to go around the mountain. Like you don't have all this time. The geography could turn it, from a 5-minute to a 40-minute trip. So it's really important that you know where things are. And increasingly, when we think about the health of our communities, everything really comes down to these place-based experiences. And so the B app is really about emphasizing that real-world locality and making people be able to show up in their backyard effectively to volunteer, to engage with their community. And yeah, so we rolled that out in June and kind of spent the summer in Vermont going to farmers markets. We handed out thousands of t-shirts, which are now like all over the state. People are telling me all the time, like, oh, I just saw one of your orange hats. I saw your farmers market shirts, which is so cool to be like 6 months into this and have statewide brand awareness. It's awesome. But we went out, we like learned a lot, validated assumptions, talked with users, and then kind of took that strategy now and have focused in on different communities within Vermont that we call these pilot communities. And honestly, we're trying to solve very similar problems in the space there as some of the stuff we've talked about, and that this podcast has touched on in terms of those problems of the commons, right? And I guess less the commons and more of like the three people out there powering the entire internet through the few NPM packages, right? And really translated into the real world, there's a similar problem, especially in volunteerism, which is the catalyst for starting B was all within the volunteerism realm. And that's that, we have older adults who have been volunteering the whole time, and there's nobody new showing up, especially younger people, even though they want to. And so it's helping integrate the desire to show up, and that could be online in an open source library, but in this case offline, and to stack wood, to clean the trails and so forth, but creating the systems that enable that to actually happen, to bring those volunteers in. So think about it maybe in the open source world, right? Say that developer has been working on his library for 5 years and he's just been going at it and it's great, it runs and so forth, but he's burnt out and he needs support with this. Well, the developer who has invested the time in putting together a great pull review process and getting their GitHub set up nicely with all of their READMEs and so forth, they're going to get the support of the open source community volunteers because they can engage easily. They don't have to go through all the hassle, right? People are busy. People want to help, but people are really darn busy. And so it's a similar line of like, hey, what are the fundamental steps that we just need to put in place so that these two sides, this ecosystem essentially of people who need help and people who are ready to provide help can transact in an effective manner.
Do you think you've fleshed out the incentivization structure to something that could be viable? Say, for instance, Saul Costa walks away from B app. What happens then?
Well, we'll see. I don't know. I think specifically this organization would definitely survive me not being here, and I've kind of created the organization specifically for that because I have a lot of other stuff that I'm working on too. So I want to make sure that I'm not a dependent there. But in terms of the incentive structure, what we are honestly betting on and what we've had validated so far is that people have, especially now, it's like we're hitting a point of despair, right, in our hearts many times. And that is grounded in reality, and you are not overthinking to have that despair in your heart. But one thing that I think is so beautiful to all of this is that we're rediscovering that behind despair is actually hope, right? And it's a desire to not exist in this despair anymore. We don't give up. It just, we don't decide to really kick in when we, as soon as we should, perhaps. But we're now getting to this point where everyone's feeling that in their hearts. They have this despair, and then they work through that, especially if they see an opportunity to be a part of the positive change. And so the incentive structure that we have specifically within the B world is really building on that desire to show up and to be a part of communities and to build real world connections after having, moved to Vermont a day before COVID and lost all of the opportunities for that, address the loneliness epidemic that is there. But there's all these like intrinsic, wonderful little things that happen when you actually show up in the real world. So for example, so I'm a young guy, right? I'm 33, I've still got a lot to learn. And I go to these B activities and I'm around older adults and they're just talking with each other. But I'm listening and I'm learning all these things I didn't know. I'm hearing like wisdom. They're like reframing the state of the world in like the context of their experience and their continued existence in times that were very different than today. And so you just get this experience that we weren't even building towards, which is, oh, wow, I'm learning all these things. They're bringing food that's like delicious and so much better than I could ever be cooking. So there's all these kind of like ancillary but meaningful, basic ways to be connecting with people. And I think sometimes we've kind of like, we've almost put too much pressure on ourselves where it's like, hey, I gotta have all this in line, and I gotta be, such point in life. And it's great to set big goals and it's great to go after things for sure. But when it fundamentally comes down to it, we as humans connect on some very basic things: food, presence, knowledge, safety. Like those core fundamental things are opportunities for us to come together in many ways because they're gaps that have been left by the system that said that it was going to take care of them. So you can't put a number on it, and that's difficult, right? Because the world runs on numbers. But I don't think that necessarily means that we can't build something that is sustainable. Which I talked to a little bit more as well, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, I think that the lineage, I mean, I'm going to summarize it also with lineage and learning from community, like we're losing the inheritance of knowledge and information, and being able to diversify our points of view through just conversation and interaction. So I think that's a really salient point of how important it is to connect with others. And something else I've noticed that I think has been incremental to B, and I would be remiss not to mention that the state of Vermont's a very unique place to launch an effort like this. The disparity in aging population is one thing. The disparity between wealth and poverty exists in pretty strong extremes. And you have, within Vermont, there's a need for these sorts of efforts because there are fewer resources, public and available resources. So really the crowdsourcing and efforts of community, I think, are very, very important. So like within that context, what are some challenges that you've faced because of, specific to Vermont that you weren't expecting?
There's been a lot of learnings. So we came out in June, and I think we had the assumption that we were going to be a lot more engaged with some of the entities we wanted to be throughout the summer, because that's when the stuff was happening. Forgetting, having been in California for a decade, that, the summer is great, but you're outside doing things during the summer, and really recognizing now that there's this winter planning cycle that everyone is engaging in, which is great because now this is our first winter, and I'm getting emails that I've sent in July getting replied to now of like, yeah, this is great. We want to do this stuff with you. So it's awesome, but that was definitely a learning. The age disparity is absolutely huge. Like, again, we have the oldest population in the country. And it's a hard one because Vermont doesn't have a lot of opportunities. And so a lot of people, myself included, they leave. We leave after college and we go out, we get our careers established. And then a lot of us, we call ourselves boomerangs. We end up back here anyway, because Vermont's awesome and we love it. So there's like kind of this missing cohort of the people that we need. However, there are a number of institutions, and in this case, particularly a lot of the schools, like the colleges and the high schools and so forth, who have very, very robust volunteering programs, or they're just classes that are kind of inspiring individuals to go out and deal with invasive species because they learned about the impact of it in their ecology course. So the dots can be connected, but I think definitely they're further apart than we initially realized. So that's definitely one big element of it. It's just kind of the top two that come to mind. I will say, like, Vermont's a beautiful place to launch this. And one of the reasons we did is because we knew of the history of volunteerism and of mutual aid. We see it all throughout the country, people pulling together after a natural disaster. And Vermont has been no exception in terms of its exposure to natural disasters and people showing up and pulling together. Problem is, I've talked with the young gentleman who's an AmeriCorps engineer that came in, and he is the person who managed all of the flood response in Montpelier, the capital of Vermont, in 2023 and 2024, when they got destroyed by these floods or very horribly impacted by them. And he just did it overnight. He was just there working.
He was AmeriCorps. That's incredible.
It was amazing. Yeah. And now, of course, he's gone. Right. So it's like, okay, cool. This is, we'll see what happens. But we're actually engaging with him to keep that going. But yeah, it's just all these things are very reactive. And that's and we're in the moment and we're like, great, everybody, it all turned out okay in the end. And everybody, got their basement mucked out and, put our sidewalks back together. But then there's a question of well, what if we were more proactive in the way we were engaging in communities, and that we were more in a state of readiness when these disasters are coming, because we have the systems to show up, not just on the trail cleaning day, which is also very, very important, but in these moments of extreme necessity that we're only going to see more of throughout the next few decades at least. And that's really, I think, the opportunity is to say okay, just because something is functioning doesn't mean it's necessarily working holistically.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. And I've also noticed that you're doing more back to the how to get things done, that that there's a lot of networking with other organizations, and agreements with other organizations. And I mean, that takes sort of curating and nurturing, I should say nurturing of these relationships. Yep. And how you can help and support each other, which is really powerful.
And honestly, that's something that is not even happening between those existing organizations right now. And that's been a huge challenge for us. We kicked everything off with this app in May 2nd. And what we did is we brought together 30 or 40 of these nonprofit leaders from throughout the state, people that we assumed all knew each other because they're all working on similar things, or they've all got the same titles and they should know each other, and they'd never met before. Wow. And they walked out of there, and we're really happy with the way it turned out. And they were just this was a retreat. This was a therapy session. We all finally got together and talked and realized I'm not alone in these problems that I'm trying to solve. So that was definitely a challenge. And our belief, and this seems to be shared by a lot of the nonprofits that I'm speaking to, even as of yesterday, is that we can't necessarily just try to mesh together. There actually needs to be a hierarchy to this. We need not even consolidation, but we need leadership in the nonprofit space that can help bring us through this period of extremely reduced resources. Because we have to remember that just because the federal government dollars get cut, right, it's actually worse than that. The state has to replace those dollars too. So all the state dollars for the funding gets cut. So you're actually losing all of your money as a nonprofit. And the money that is remaining is so much more competitive, even though you're working on the same things. Those shouldn't be 2 grant applications. That should be 1 for 5 organizations who are now one organization. And it's unfortunate, but also a little fortunate, or maybe a silver lining, that consolidation is going to happen naturally, in the sense that the money's gone. So there's going to be consolidation, but that represents an opportunity to really think from that more top-down perspective of, okay, how do we actually engage in these types of efforts, and where are we, where are the optimizations that can really be happening?
That's super, Andrew. Like, it reminds me a lot of just your own personal work, but the idea of these sort of networked architectures. What about the hierarchy? So you mentioned the hierarchy. Like, is that something that is organic and by consensus, or is it that, who becomes the leader in that effort?
I think it's going to be the organization that steps up to do it.
Yeah.
It's going to be, but that is also, the step needs to exist for them to do that, and for that they need to have the resources. And I haven't found another organization, to be completely honest, that has the resources to allocate to something that novel. Like it's not guaranteed that if we had more hierarchy that this would bring everything together in the way that we want. And nonprofits are so heads down; they're beholden to the grant, grants they've received. So I honestly think it's really going to come down to, everybody recognizes what they need. They don't always know how to get there. They lack the resources to get there, which is unfortunate. And that's created an opportunity for leadership within this space. And, I think it will be more organic than consensus. We'd actually talked about this a little bit at the summit, and it was, talk about, hey, we got to get everybody to buy in. And someone's idea was like, oh, the state should be running this, and it should be like a mandatory thing. Everyone puts the thing in. It's like, no, that's not, you don't tell people to go on a product to use it because you've legislated it into existence. You do it because you created value that has an atomic nature to it and start to draw in those individuals. So I think that Vermont, and probably most places, but Vermont in particular, is primed to have a natural attractant like that can really bring organizations together. However, this is not just saying, we can't just say like, great, we're all going to get on a meeting at some point and like talk through our ideas. And this is where I know you're going to get really excited, but it's like, we have to have a common language, right? Like, what are we working towards together? And how can we each take those elements of it and derive our individual work and drive towards the same types of outcomes? And that's one of the reasons we created a taxonomy at Shock on, like, way earlier than most. I mean, Jessica, you and I, we worked for a multi-billion-dollar company that had just created their first real taxonomy. And we did it with, I think we had 12 employees at that point. But we did it because we know that there needs to be that backbone of communication between these organizations and all of the operators within this space, the individuals as well who want to show up, and the grant writers and the grant, and the grant funders, and just, the data brokers and providers, and how the news is integrating. Like, we all have to be speaking the same language if we all want to walk the same direction. And that's why I'm so happy that taxonomies are a thing, and that you've created an amazing one for us already.
Yeah, full disclosure, I created it. It's really a thesaurus, but yeah, taxonomy, which exists on the front end of the Bee app website. And it's interesting because, of course, conversations evolve, because something that's nuanced is bees in Vermont, and vocabulary, language tends, and vernacular tends to be localized or regional. So it was really fun to build. But the other part is it just also becomes like a conversation starter. When you do expose it, and, I've had plenty of conversations around that as well. What are the right words to use? What's the right way to phrase this? How do we define it? Like, what are, it's just very, very interesting to be in that world. And it does have a little bit of a startup vibe in that it's helping to define spaces and common understanding. And so it becomes like a talking stick, I guess.
Definitely.
In that community.
Which is very important when you're operating as a nonprofit with, marginalized communities and a lot of sensitivity around, multiple issues that are impacting people in severe ways. Vermont also has the highest opioid overdose rate. We have the highest unhoused rate. Just heard another one the other day. I don't remember, but it's like and again, we have 700,000 people. So the numbers are going to skew, but when you're on the ground and you're seeing those things and you're meeting those people, it is real. It's,
Yes,
regardless of where it is relative to other places, it is real here too.
yeah. And it's interesting, like things that you don't even think about. It's just the sensitivity around, just had this conversation the other day about, okay, we called it elder care. And of course, someone from the community might say, no, I don't appreciate that, and call it older adults. But then the next day you have an event that's listed that's like elder art.
Right.
Yep. And so there are those nuances, but it does become very important in community driven efforts as well. So what, like beyond B, and I'm curious, do you have a vision? I know that your hands are full, but do you have a vision to expand this concept or this app, or has anyone approached you about even partnering to try to launch a similar effort in another location or another city, another state?
Yeah, I think we're still figuring out like what our geographic expansion plans look like.
Yeah.
I think really like, so originally we were building a remote organization, and since coming back here and being reminded of how fantastically tenacious and intelligent Vermonters are, we've now decided like, no, we're actually going to optimize for a Vermont workforce. And Vermont has a history of producing, of being a leader. Vermont was the first ever state to constitutionally protect civil unions and gay marriage. We were the first state to legislatively decriminalize marijuana. I won't go into too far into the story, but the telegraph machine actually came from Vermont as well, which I will record a YouTube video about that to talk about, because this is a fantastic story. The washing machine was invented, the patent for the washing machine, first ever one, is from the town that I live in.
Oh, wow.
And so, and then like there was a period of history, I think it was like early 20th century, I believe, where Vermont had like people who had been born in Vermont, that was the highest number of them within the legislature, more people who had come from Vermont than anybody else in the federal legislature, even though they weren't living there anymore. Meat packaging, massive scales, like so many innovations have come from Vermont. And my hope is that the B app will kind of follow suit, probably in a smaller capacity than something as fundamental as a washing machine, but at the same time, it's our hope is that we can be operating in a space like Vermont, which presents many opportunities, makes it the right place to start, but also has some unique challenges. And then taking those learnings, we can develop a set of resources that can be applicable in other locales as well, with some adjustments. So for us, it's a decision of, do we try to geographically grow B ourselves? Do we create resources to enable that? There's still a lot TBD on that, but ultimately, I think we're really going to make sure that we're not being in a place just to be there. If we can be providing the tools and the resources for the people who are already on the ground to succeed. That's really on the B side. On the on the Shock side, which is the parent nonprofit organization that created B, very different. And without getting too far down into the weeds, and this ties in now with also like organizational sustainability, really the opportunity we see is to start to take some of the for-profit principles and bring them into the nonprofit space. So many people think that they're butting heads, like for-profit, nonprofit can't work together. And most people either go into for-profit and stay in for-profit because you got student loans and food is twice what it was 6 months ago. And I don't blame anybody for doing that at all. And the people who succeed in nonprofit or in for-profit very well sometimes dip their toes into the nonprofit space, but it's more of like, hey, I've got my family foundation, I'm gonna make these grants. They're not really like directly in it. And so I feel fortunate to have had that start in the for-profit space, and now end up finding myself, being in the nonprofit space, but also having a lot of exposure throughout, especially the last few years, to just the financial system in general, its mechanics, its history, and developing understandings of. I didn't go to school for finance or any of this stuff, and so coming in and just learning like these absolute fundamentals about the how money works, right, and how the economy works, and then going into the nonprofit space and kind of thinking like, wait, like why aren't we doing some of that? And I'll give you a very like fundamental example, which is money makes money, right? You invest in a mutual bond, CD, get money back. A lot of those, actually, this is the best one. At our summit, I was speaking with a nonprofit leader, like a who's who, and I was speaking with them, and they said, it came up, and they were like, well, nonprofits can't have brokerage accounts. And I looked at them like, yeah, they absolutely can. Our nonprofit has a brokerage account, and they didn't know. They didn't even believe me after that. And so there's like, that's kind of the starting point that we're at of this lack of understanding of the potential for using for-profit principles to enhance the nonprofit space. But there's other natural barriers in there as well. For example, met with a nonprofit recently, and they have $10,000 on hand, and they have that split to a point where it's divided into a couple of CDs, and they've got a little bit of cash, and they were talking about the rates that they were getting on the CDs, and it was like 0.4%, and that's like horrible for a certified deposit, right? And so we asked them like, why is this so bad? And it's because they need more money before they start actually paying out those rates. So then you ask yourselves like, okay, well, why are all the nonprofits managing their money individually, right? Why aren't we pooling this and investing this? And that's like a simple, immediate, we should be doing that tomorrow type of an approach, all trust-based, right? So we can't do it tomorrow, but it's present. But there's even more fundamental things that I'm not going to talk about too much, because this is actually something that we're like still developing and we're not bringing out to the public yet. But the fundamental ideas are taking for-profit principles, merging them into nonprofit space, expanding the reach of the relatively few dollars that do make it into the nonprofit space, but really thinking about nonprofit as having to step up and play the same game that the for-profit is playing, which can be done without using values, and actually can be done, if it's done in the right way, to enhance all of the great work that's already being done. Mm-hmm. So tying it back to earlier, at Shock, as we grow and as we create a sustainable organization, B is very much our kind of like front line, going out, creating these relationships within communities, helping solve a problem that very much exists. But ultimately, Shock is going to expand in kind of a larger scale, specifically looking at some of these more like systems level integrations, both from a thought perspective, but then also taking the results of that inquiry and translating that into reality using technology.
Oh, that's so cool. Andrew.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to
testing it all.
So I guess my question is, your technology, to me, this is how I'm interpreting it. It's almost like a conduit to the town square. We often talk about a town square in a commons, or get to that destination. And what I'm hearing from you is like, you want people to convene and have genuine human interactions like we have traditionally before the internet came, where it's largely a capture model. Get everybody into a virtual space, have governance over that virtual space, and keep them there. And it seems almost like your model is more of a conduit to enable genuine convenings so that people can have these conversations and talk about, well, how can we exist in a better capacity by joining forces and by aggregating, by having those conversations we otherwise wouldn't have. Am I mischaracterizing the technology as a conduit?
No. And no, not at all. I would say like the town square is a perfect analogy. I would say Twitter already laid claim to that one, so I'll just stay out of that. But we talk a lot about common ground. And one thing that I think we all need to be reminded of, not conceptually, but by having experiences that reinforce this understanding, is that someone might have voted for someone might have voted for somebody else. And that is, it should matter way less than it does already, but right now people's identities are tied to their political parties in an extreme way. However, those people can still meet on the park and pick it up because they have kids who play at that park and they don't want rusty things on the ground and bottles and all that type of stuff. So they can align on the many, many things that we do have in common that had politicians and the internet convince us that we don't share anymore, and then really start to spur the types of conversations that you're describing, that higher level. But we need to first establish the fundamental mutual understandings, because when it really comes down to it, we all agree. We just want a safe place to be. We want food. We want community. We want education, right? I think that's pretty much the fundamentals right there. And so those aren't political. They don't need to be political. We make them political, but they're fundamental. And so when we're showing up and we're working at the food shelf and we're all identifying, ourselves with this movement, even within our own community, to do good, that transcends all the lies and all the fake ads. And a hug can just go so far. And so I think, you really did sum it up exactly. It's like it is that conduit to just get people back together and get them face to face, get them sweating side by side, like pulling out the knotweed and all that stuff, get them out in nature, breathing in, the dirt and everything, and just create spaces for people to start coming together in ways that the online spaces liked to tell us that we would, but then ultimately just drove us apart by hyper optimizing the content that we consumed.
And so the antithesis of divisiveness, it seems here, is like your currency in this model is like shared understanding and common ground.
Yep. We call it trust. Yep. Our communities very much transact in trust.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's amazing to see the community grow, and what's become of it. If I highly suggest that if anyone has a chance to check out, it's joinb.app. If you want to see what B is all about, and it's simply places events on a map, and you can find out the details, where and when to show up, and you can sign up, and it's really, really incredible. It's a way to get involved with community, but there's also other opportunities. It's not all volunteering. That's what I think is so interesting about it. Like, you can go and learn how to do something. You can go and take a walking tour of a solar farm, like a solar power farm, solar energy farm. So it's like multifaceted when you think of showing up in real life. That reality aspect is absolutely important. Is critical. Certain how humans are humans is interacting with one another. So in terms of like Shock's model and how it's going to extend its reach, can you share with us like any of the feedback you've gotten from people in the community, or any sort of like-minded efforts? I know that I mentioned that or asked before about like-minded efforts, but like, I'm really also curious, and this is included in part of the question, like, does California have an equivalent effort in any way, or if like where else can we see this flourishing, growing, developing within our own communities?
I think there are pockets in California where it could definitely work. I think that California community is more aligned on shared interests, and as opposed to, I think, what we're trying to do, which is more values oriented. Like, you're not going to find, the people at the bike club because one of them's not into biking and the other one is, but they, like I said, they both have an aligned objective within the community that ties into their real world existence. So, like I spent the last 5 years in San Diego, and I'm ashamed to say I knew my next door neighbors. We had each other's phone numbers, and I grabbed coffee with a few of them a couple of times. But other than that, I didn't know two people 2 houses down, and that's not uncommon. That is just the way that it kind of works. And so when I think about our expansion and kind of the places I want to see be next, I see potentially areas of California that would eventually be interesting, but I'm really more thinking about, places like Colorado, like Maine, probably New Hampshire, places with kind of that shared DNA of community, of nature. Nature is absolutely fundamental. I founded this organization because I came to Vermont in 2022 and I saw what has happened here for the last 10 years. And I was like, I need to be a part of something to help this. And that has what ultimately led to here. So yeah, we'll see about California, but I think Shock's growth is going to be fairly natural, but also deliberate as well. We know that the thing that we are creating, and that the core ideology of, hey, let's wake up to tech and let's really start rethinking how we're engaging with it, is a shared understanding. Or even if this is what we hear every single day, it seems. That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm so glad you said that. Like, all the words are all there. People just, they haven't taken it from their subconscious feeling mind yet and put it into their conscious mind of like execution, implementation, integration. And I think that's maybe one of the values that we're bringing to it, is that we're saying the words, we have the technology now, we have the spirit. And so it is gonna be really cool to see how that kind of grows beyond Vermont. But right now, very, very focused on Vermont. I think it's all about getting it right here, learning everything that we can, showing up with our communities, building the, that movement and that funding engine that we talked about earlier, making sure we have that really set up and stable before we push forward.
Yeah, and it is possible. I mean, I think it's encouraging, and it's motivating to see this effort grow and take on its own life. And I think that's something that must be feel so rewarding as a founder, and as a participant, is to see the lights turn on.
Yeah, it really is great. And just seeing, we're just now in our user growth starting to see the, we're regularly like beating our growth curve week after week. And so that's honestly not a phase that I've reached in with my last startup. It was very like SaaS oriented, like big negotiations, big contracts. And so we have these like floods of users come in. So it's been really, really cool to be a part of that, like organic, our word of mouth from day one has been powerful. Like, showing up is just crazy. And so, yeah, I mean, I can't believe sometimes that we're literally only 5 months that we've been live in the, in the app stores and out there talking about this. And when people hear about us and they say like, oh, you got this done, like, we're 5, 6 years old. And like, no, we're, 2 years old. Or when we launched, 18 months, and people look at us and they're like, what? I mean, granted, we have founder funds, right?
Right.
But
right.
at the same time, we are not approaching this as a nonprofit organization. Our board has 2 members, me and a guy that I know, and he's super cool and he's down for whatever I'm going to do. I'm not dealing with boards from nonprofits. Like, eventually I want to create a very strong complementary nonprofit board that can rein me in and guide me. But, I talk to a lot of nonprofits and they say, wow, this is really, really cool. Got to talk to the board. And we're not coming in. We're coming in as a nonprofit community technology startup. And I think that hopefully is starting to demonstrate to both sides that, one, you can be in tech, and you can be in tech for good, and you can be a nonprofit. It's harder. It's a lot harder, but it is possible. And also to the nonprofit space of like, hey, this is what's possible. These are the types of tools and systems that actually could exist for you. Because it's not even that the nonprofit world is looking out at the for-profit tech and and just saying, oh, I wish we had that, I wish we had that. Right. They don't even know what exists. They don't even know what exists, and what they do know exists, they don't understand. And so it has been very rewarding to get to kind of be the a guide and an educator with some of these nonprofits, directly or just by bringing them these tools, and just being able to kind of show them like, no, there's a modern world, and they spend a lot of time fighting the products of the modern world, and the the results of the consumption and the greed. And it's now I think honestly we're headed towards a level playing field, and that's going to be great, because when you, not to diverge too far, but when you go back about 100 years, there was balance to generosity, and there was balance to making money. A lot of the names that we think about as like vilified, this is more like late 19th century, but like we talk about the great industrialists and how horrible they all were. We don't talk about that those people were pumping huge amounts of money into their communities. The government, like now, didn't exist. They barely had income tax coming in. And so it was these industry titans, not all of them, not even most of them, but many of them stepping up and into a movement led by Andrew Carnegie.
I was about to mention Carnegie. Yes.
Yep. What is it? What the hell is it? Generation. I'm forgetting what his he had a paper that he wrote. Totally blanking on it, but it was all about this concept of like, philanthropy is only so great. Charity really doesn't do anything. We need to be engaging in systemic change. Gospel of Wealth, I think that was what it's called. Yep. And so
1,300 libraries or something to that effect. Yeah, it's incredible.
All around the world.
Yeah.
And you have to think like, okay, like maybe we should have like leaned into that a little bit more. Like taking all our money and giving it to a government, like doesn't really look like that was the way to go. But that's a hot take to use the social media term, is like, no, let the rich people run things. Honestly, not all rich people. Many rich people got rich because they were very smart. Right. And one thing that I think is like the greatest pursuit of any wealthy individual or anybody who has the chance to do this is that like pursuit of knowledge. And being wealthy opens up those opportunities to it. And I think that honestly, it could be, but the problem is that just like volunteers or would-be volunteers who want to show up in their communities, as a rich individual, generosity is hard in the modern world. Yeah. You can't, it's just philanthropy and charity, and most people who are wealthy, who spend a lot of time thinking about their money and building sustainable, lifestyles for themselves sometimes and so forth, they don't want to just hand their money off, especially when they hear about, people buying their private jets and all that. They want impact. They want to see the real world impact. And as the for-profit space created complexity and responded to the generational surge of population that we saw, like the fundamentals of for-profit scaled, the fundamentals of nonprofit didn't. It just produced, and many times now, for-profit behemoths. Like they're not for-profit, but Red Cross, they do some stuff, but like these big nonprofits that are out there that are just totally charity oriented. And what really excites me is that like, now that we have technology, we can create these communication channels. We can create transaction channels. We can move money around in ways that was never possible before. I don't look at Elon and blame Elon. I think he's got some things he's got to sort out in himself. He needs to go on a few like ayahuasca retreats or something probably. But ultimately, I wonder if Elon had an outlet for some of those billions that could have made him feel good because he saw where his money was going. Would that have changed it? And I'm not talking about just Elon, right? I'm talking about systemically. Like if we had outlets for generosity, would we have used them, and would that have put us in a different place? I think so. Yeah. And I think that it's worth using technology even today where we are, people say late capitalism. I think we're just getting started. We're just figuring out how capitalism can be complementary to the world as opposed to consuming it. So it's really fun to think about those systems and get to work on them as well.
That's a really interesting take on that whole, it's a lens into how to reimagine, the future and democratizing. Like, thank you for bringing it back to the commons and knowledge, because absolutely, Carnegie is a great example. I actually had to look it up to fact check. 2005, I was close, 2,509 libraries.
Wow, that's amazing.
But it was really incredible worldwide when you think about it. Is that type of of helping to, you're feeding your community, you're feeding the commons and making, you're presenting and you're creating opportunities for others. And I think that's what's really important. So, Saul, like I've already dropped the B app, but how can, if people want to follow along, is there a way that they can follow along with B or Shock or any of those efforts?
Totally. Yeah. So if you're on social media, the B social media is very active and just a great feed. Honestly, it's very different than what you see on social media typically. And we are the B app on the socials. We have a newsletter on our website on joinb.app that is now much more active as well. For me personally, the only like direct communication that I have on socials is via Blue Sky. Which I'm just now getting onto, but I've already posted plenty of things that'll probably get me in trouble. And so that's one spot. And then also I'll just throw out there that I actually wrote a book called Endeavor that I just completed a couple of months ago, which is available. If you go to my website, saulcosta.com, it's linked to on there. But that's actually kind of like a memoir, coming of age, exploration of existence that covers my childhood, upbringing, homeschooled Vermont farm boy through Silicon Valley, selling a startup, but then also kind of rediscovering myself afterwards. So there's a lot that has led to today, and if you're interested in reading a few hundred pages of that or listening to it, then you can do that.
Awesome. Thank you. And check out Saul's book for sure. I've read it. It's good. It's definitely worth it. And we so appreciate you being here on the show. And we will on the recording, we'll drop all of these links in the description, so you can also find it there. So
awesome. Well, yeah, thank you both for having me. This wonderful conversation, and sure we'll do some more sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Saul. Appreciate it.
Take care.